You are not seeing this by accident. Moments like this arrive when the inner world is shifting before the outer one can catch up. Long before visible change, the psyche prepares itself through tension, confusion, and even collapse. What you may have been calling a low point is often the threshold where the old self can no longer survive, and the new one has not yet fully emerged. This in-between state feels uncomfortable, but it is also sacred. It means something deep within you has decided that the life you were living is no longer sufficient. Every great comeback begins in the shadow. When life strips away certainty, status, or direction, it is not punishing you, it is asking you to confront the parts of yourself you avoided when things were easy. Strength is not built in moments of comfort, but in moments when the ego cracks and deeper truth leaks through. Right now, you may feel lost, tired, or invisible, but invisibility is often where transformation incubates. Seeds grow underground, not in applause. Pay attention to the patterns that have been repeating in your life. The same challenges, the same emotional triggers, the same relationships showing up in different forms. These are not coincidences, they are messages. Life repeats lessons until consciousness expands enough to understand them. Your comeback begins the moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to awaken in me?" The discomfort you feel is a signal that you are outgrowing an old identity. The mind resists this because it prefers familiarity over truth. But the soul does not care about comfort, it cares about wholeness. That is why breakdown often precedes breakthrough. You are being invited to integrate what you once rejected. Your fear, your anger, your vulnerability, so they no longer control you from the shadows. Do not rush this process. Real transformation is not loud. It does not announce itself on the outside. It happens quietly, when you choose honesty over illusion, responsibility over blame, and self-awareness over self-pity. Each small act of courage rewires your inner world, and eventually the outer world has no choice but to follow. One day, you will look back and realize this was the moment everything changed. Not because circumstances suddenly improved, but because you did. You learned how to stand in your own depth, how to trust the darkness as much as the light, and how to rebuild yourself from the inside out. That is the true comeback, not returning to who you were, but becoming who you were always meant to be. Major personal comebacks do not begin when the world applauds you or when circumstances finally align in your favor. They begin much earlier, in a place few people are willing to stay long enough to understand. Inner discomfort is the true starting point of transformation. It arrives as restlessness, dissatisfaction, or a quiet sense that something is wrong even when everything appears fine on the surface. This discomfort is not a flaw in your life. It is a signal that your inner world is no longer compatible with the identity you have been living. When the psyche outgrows its old structure, tension is inevitable. External success often delays growth because it distracts you from listening inward. Comfort numbs awareness. When life is smooth, the mind clings to familiar patterns, even if they are limiting or false. Inner discomfort, however, removes that numbness. It forces attention inward toward unresolved fears, suppressed emotions, and ignored truths. This is why periods of confusion or emotional pain often feel unbearable. They demand honesty. They strip away the roles you played to survive and expose the parts of you that were never given space to speak. At first, inner discomfort feels like failure. You may interpret it as weakness, loss of direction, or personal inadequacy, but in reality, it is the psyche refusing to live a half-life. Something within you recognizes, and continuing as before would mean betraying your deeper nature. The mind resists this recognition because it threatens the image you hold of yourself. The ego prefers stability, even if that stability is built on avoidance. Discomfort destabilizes that illusion, and in doing so creates the conditions for real change. This internal friction often manifests before any visible shift occurs. You may feel worse before you feel better. Motivation disappears, old ambitions lose their meaning, and certainty dissolves. Yet this empty space is not meaningless. It is a psychological clearing. The old self is loosening its grip, but the new self has not yet taken form. Many people escape this phase by chasing distractions or external validation, mistaking movement for progress. But true comebacks require staying present with the discomfort long enough to understand what it is asking of you. Inner discomfort also acts as a mirror. It reveals where you have been living unconsciously, repeating inherited beliefs or emotional patterns without question. The pain intensifies where growth is needed most. What irritates you, what exhausts you, what makes you feel stuck, these are not random experiences. They are precise indicators of where awareness must expand. When you stop resisting this discomfort and begin observing it, it transforms from an enemy into a guide. A real comeback is not a sudden rise, it is a gradual internal reorganization. Values shift, priorities realign, and self-understanding deepens. None of this is visible at first. From the outside it may look like stagnation, but inwardly foundations are being rebuilt. Strength formed this way is not dependent on approval or outcomes, it is rooted in self-knowledge. And once that root takes hold, external success becomes a byproduct, not the source, of your power. Emotional struggles are often misunderstood as evidence that something has gone wrong, that you are falling behind, or that you lack strength. In reality, they are signals that an inner transformation is underway. When emotions become intense, confusing, or heavy, it usually means that the structures you once relied on can no longer hold the truth of who you are becoming. The psyche does not disturb itself without reason. Emotional tension arises when growth demands movement, when old ways of thinking and feeling no longer fit the deeper direction of your life. Most people are taught to measure progress by stability and control. From that perspective, emotional pain feels like regression, but transformation rarely appears orderly. It disrupts the familiar because the familiar is often built on avoidance. Emotional struggle brings to the surface what was previously buried. Fear, grief, anger, and sadness emerge not to punish you, but to be recognized and integrated. When these emotions are ignored or suppressed, they operate unconsciously, shaping decisions from the shadows. When they surface, they do so with force, demanding awareness. This is why emotional struggles often appear at turning points. A relationship ends, a sense of purpose dissolves, or a long-held belief collapses. The emotional response to these moments can feel overwhelming, yet it is precisely this intensity that carries meaning. Something essential is being renegotiated within you. The pain signals that the old identity is loosening, that the internal balance you once depended on has shifted. What feels like breakdown is often the psyche reorganizing itself at a deeper level. Emotional struggle also exposes the difference between who you have been and who you are becoming. There is grief in this realization. You may mourn lost versions of yourself, unmet expectations or illusions that once gave you comfort. This grief is not weakness, it is honesty. It marks the moment you stop pretending that old answers still work. Without emotional struggle, such honesty would never be reached. Comfort keeps illusions intact. Pain dissolves them. Many people attempt to escape emotional discomfort by labeling it as failure. This interpretation adds shame to pain and creates resistance to the very process that could lead to growth. When emotions are judged, they intensify. When they are observed with curiosity, they soften and reveal their message. Emotional struggle becomes unbearable only when it is misunderstood. When recognized as a signal, it becomes a guide. Transformation requires the integration of parts of the self that were once rejected. Emotional struggles point directly to these areas. They show where self-knowledge is incomplete and where awareness must expand. Each emotional wave carries information about unmet needs, misaligned values, or suppressed truths. Listening does not mean indulging the emotion, but understanding its origin and purpose. What emerges on the other side of emotional struggle is not the person you were before the pain, but someone more whole. Stability returns, but it is no longer fragile. It is grounded in self-awareness rather than denial. Emotional struggles do not announce failure. They announce the end of a limited way of being and the beginning of a deeper alignment with yourself. Repeating life patterns exist to push you toward deeper self-awareness. 2. Expend it in 500 words without subheading and conclusions. Repeating life patterns are rarely random, yet they are often experienced as frustrating accidents. The same types of relationships, conflicts, disappointments, or emotional reactions seem to appear again and again, even when the external details change. Most people interpret this repetition as bad luck or a personal flaw, but its true purpose runs deeper. Repetition exists because something within you has not yet been fully seen or understood. Life does not repeat itself to punish you, but to bring unconscious material into awareness. The psyche learns through experience, not explanation. When an inner issue remains unconscious, it cannot be resolved intellectually. Instead, it expresses itself through patterns that recreate similar emotional situations. You may promise yourself that this time will be different, yet find yourself reacting in familiar ways. This is not because you are incapable of change, but because awareness has not yet reached the root of the pattern. Until it does, the same lesson returns in a new form, asking for recognition. These repeating cycles often carry strong emotional charge. The intensity is a clue. Wherever the emotion is strongest, something meaningful is being touched. Patterns connected to abandonment, control, self-worth or trust tend to repeat because they were formed early and reinforced over time. They shape perception automatically. Without awareness, you respond not to the present moment, but to an old inner script. Repetition continues because the script remains unexamined. What makes these patterns difficult to recognize is familiarity. What is familiar feels normal, even when it is painful. You may unconsciously gravitate toward situations that confirm your internal beliefs about yourself and the world. If you believe at a deep level that you must struggle to be valued, life will repeatedly present situations where struggle becomes central. These patterns persist, not because they are true, but because they are known. The mind prefers the known over the unknown, even when the unknown holds freedom. Repeating patterns serve as mirrors. Each recurrence highlights an aspect of yourself that seeks integration. The people who trigger you, the situations that drain you, the moments that leave you feeling powerless, all point inward. They reveal where boundaries are weak, where fear overrides truth, or where self-understanding is incomplete. Without repetition, these blind spots would remain hidden. Awareness is sharpened through contrast, and repetition provides that contrast. Breaking a pattern does not begin with changing circumstances, but with changing perception. The moment you stop asking why this keeps happening, and start asking what it reveals about your inner world, the pattern loosens its grip. Awareness interrupts automatic behavior. It creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice becomes possible. You no longer act out the pattern unconsciously, you observe it as it arises. Over time, repetition loses its necessity. Once a lesson is integrated, life no longer needs to repeat it. The pattern dissolves not because you fought it, but because you understood it. What remains is a deeper relationship with yourself, built on awareness rather than reaction. Repeating life patterns are not signs that you are stuck, they are invitations to see yourself more clearly than ever before. Breakdown is often feared as the moment when everything falls apart, when stability disappears and the sense of self feels threatened. Yet what is commonly labeled as collapse is frequently a necessary stage in the process of inner integration. A breakdown occurs when the structures that once held your identity together can no longer contain the truth of your inner experience. It is not the end of strength, but the end of an outdated arrangement within the psyche. Inner integration requires honesty, and honesty is impossible when the self is tightly defended. The mind builds protective identities to survive, adapt, and belong. Over time, these identities harden into rigid roles. When life demands growth beyond them, tension accumulates. A breakdown happens when that tension can no longer be managed through avoidance or control. Emotional overwhelm, loss of direction, or deep exhaustion signal that the old structure is no longer viable. What makes breakdown painful is the loss of certainty. Familiar narratives dissolve. You may no longer know who you are, what you want, or what you believe. This disorientation feels dangerous because identity is tied to meaning. Yet meaning cannot evolve without first being questioned. The breakdown clears psychological space. It dismantles false coherence so that a deeper coherence can emerge. Without this collapse, inner contradictions remain hidden and integration cannot occur. During breakdown, suppressed aspects of the self often surface. Emotions that were ignored, desires that were denied, and fears that were pushed aside come forward, demanding recognition. This can feel chaotic, but it is actually the psyche attempting to restore balance. Integration does not mean eliminating these parts, it means allowing them to be seen, understood, and placed within a larger whole. Breakdown exposes what was fragmented so it can be reunited consciously. Many people try to recover quickly from breakdown by restoring their old identity. They rush to feel normal again, mistaking familiarity for healing. But true integration requires staying present with the discomfort long enough to learn from it. Avoiding the breakdown only guarantees its return in another form. When approached with awareness, breakdown becomes initiation rather than disaster. In this stage, strength looks different. It is no longer about control or endurance, but about openness, allowing uncertainty, admitting vulnerability, and facing inner contradictions require more courage than maintaining a rigid self-image. The breakdown teaches humility, limits, and truth. It strips away illusions of invincibility and replaces them with authenticity. As integration unfolds, a quieter stability begins to form. It is not based on denial or perfection, but on self-knowledge. The parts of the self that were once in conflict find relationship with one another. Emotional energy that was spent on suppression becomes available for creativity and presence. Life does not return to what it was before the breakdown. It reorganizes around a more honest center. Breakdown, when understood, is not failure. It is a psychological turning point where fragmentation becomes visible and therefore transformable. Without breakdown, integration remains theoretical. With it, wholeness becomes possible. Growth does not occur through the accumulation of positive traits alone. It requires a willingness to face what has been avoided. Every person carries aspects of themselves that were once rejected because they felt unsafe, unacceptable, or inconvenient. These parts do not disappear when ignored. They retreat into the background, shaping behavior indirectly through emotional reactions, repeated patterns, and inner conflict. True growth begins when avoidance ends and attention turns toward what has been pushed away. The parts of yourself you avoid often hold qualities you were taught to suppress. Anger may have been labeled as dangerous, vulnerability as weakness, desire as selfishness, or fear as failure. In order to belong or survive, you learn to disown these experiences. Over time, this disowning creates an inner division. The personality becomes organized around what is acceptable while the rest of the self operates unconsciously. Growth becomes limited because wholeness has been fractured. Avoided parts tend to announce themselves through discomfort. Strong emotional reactions, irrational fears, or sudden self-sabotage often signal that something unacknowledged is seeking expression. The more these parts are resisted, the louder they become. They surface not to disrupt your life, but to restore balance. What you avoid controls you precisely because it remains unseen. What you confront begins to lose its grip. Confrontation does not mean judgment or aggression. It means turning toward inner experiences with curiosity rather than fear. When you allow yourself to feel what you once avoided, you discover that these parts carry valuable information. Anger may reveal violated boundaries. Sadness may point to ungrieved loss. Fear may indicate where growth is required. Accepting these signals does not make you weaker, it makes you more aware. Acceptance transforms inner conflict into inner dialogue. Instead of fighting against parts of yourself, you begin listening to them. This listening creates integration. Each part finds its place within a larger sense of self. Energy once used to suppress emotions becomes available for clarity and creativity. Growth accelerates not through force, but through inclusion. Many people fear that accepting avoided parts will overwhelm them or justify harmful behavior. In reality, the opposite occurs. Awareness creates choice. When you recognize an emotion, you are no longer unconsciously driven by it. You can respond rather than react. Acceptance is not indulgence, it is responsibility. It allows you to act from understanding instead of compulsion. As avoided parts are integrated, self-image becomes more flexible and honest. You no longer need to protect an idealized version of yourself. Strength becomes grounded rather than performative. You relate to others with greater depth because you are no longer hiding from yourself. Growth becomes less about becoming someone else and more about reclaiming what was already there. The path of growth is not upward in a straight line, it is inward toward wholeness. By confronting and accepting the parts of yourself you avoid, you recover lost aspects of your own humanity. In doing so, you do not just improve your life, you deepen it. The greatest comeback is often misunderstood as a return to a former version of yourself, a time when things felt easier, clearer, or more successful. But real transformation does not move backward. It moves inward and forward at the same time. Becoming more whole means integrating everything you have lived through, including failure, loss, and change, rather than attempting to erase them. The desire to go back usually arises from fear, not truth. It reflects a longing for familiarity, not alignment. Your old self was shaped by circumstances, coping strategies, and limitations that were necessary at the time. That version of you helped you survive, but it was never meant to be permanent. When life disrupts your sense of identity, It is not asking you to rebuild what was lost. It is asking you to outgrow it. A comeback rooted in wholeness accepts that you cannot unknow what you now know or undo what has already transformed you. Becoming whole requires integrating both strength and vulnerability. Many people define growth as eliminating weakness, but wholeness means allowing contradiction. It means holding confidence and doubt, ambition and rest, independence and connection within the same self. The old identity often depended on one-sidedness to feel secure. Wholeness dissolves that rigidity. It replaces a narrow sense of self with a deeper, more flexible one. A return to the old self would mean returning to old patterns. It would mean repeating the same emotional reactions, relationships, and limitations that once felt familiar. True comeback breaks these cycles. It does not deny the past, it includes it. The experiences that challenged you become part of your inner structure, not wounds you hide from, but sources of understanding that inform how you move forward. Wholeness also changes how you measure success. Instead of chasing external validation to confirm your worth, you develop an internal coherence that does not depend on constant approval. You become less reactive, more grounded, and more present. This shift is subtle but powerful. Life may still bring difficulty, but you meet it from a place of integration rather than fragmentation. The process of becoming whole often feels slower than rebuilding an old identity. There are fewer dramatic gestures and more quiet realizations. You let go of the need to prove yourself. You allow parts of your personality to evolve naturally. This patience is not passivity, it is trust in an internal process that unfolds at its own pace. A real comeback does not recreate who you were before the fall. It honors that the fall changed you. Wholeness means you no longer split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You stand as one, shaped by experience but not defined by regret. In this state, forward movement becomes authentic. You are no longer trying to reclaim the past, you are embodying a deeper version of yourself that could only exist because of everything you endured. And so, if you feel like you are standing at the edge of yourself, uncertain and unfinished, understand that this is not a sign you have failed. It is a sign you are no longer willing to live divided. The urge to go back is understandable, but it belongs to fear, not to growth. What lies ahead is not a return, but a reunion with the parts of you that were lost, silenced, or postponed. This is where your true comeback begins, not in restoring what once was, but in allowing yourself to become whole. When you stop trying to recover the past and start integrating your experience, you step into a strength that cannot be taken away because it is built from truth.